I recently sorted through all the thrifted treasures in my garage because it was getting way out of hand. I kept bringing stuff in and I would forget about all the good stuff I already had. So in today's video, I am starting with one of those thrifted treasures that I absolutely love and I can't believe I buried it. Please let me know if you're like me. I can't be the only one. My name's Cheryl, and I may or may not be a hoarder. Welcome to Lifestyle of a DIYer, and let's get right into it. I love the heavy, rustic look of this tray. I don't know how I buried it in my garage. This tray doesn't need a lot. I think it just needs to be freshened up. The first thing I did was sand off the design. When I flipped it over to sand the back, I saw this dark spot. I just want to make sure that's not mold, so I'm going to use this Concrobium mold control spray. I saturated it, I let it sit overnight, and then I sanded it the next morning. I also needed to make a few repairs, so I just used some wood glue. I clamped it, and then again I had to leave it overnight. In the morning, I used Howard feed and wax to condition the wood. I had some watered down Waverly antique wax, so I used that to deepen up the color of the wood. Next, I used the Jamie Ray Vintage Grain Sack Stencil. There are 3 different grain sack stripes in this stencil, and I used 2 of the 3. One for spacing, and then the other one to make 2 stripes. I used the JRV 1-inch stencil brush and Fusion Mineral Paint in the color Bayberry. And the key to getting a nice crisp line is offloading most of the paint before you stencil. The stencil wasn't quite long enough to do the whole tray, so I just had to move it, finish my stenciling, and then I did the same thing to the other side of the tray. Then I added one more stencil to the center of the tray. This stencil I purchased off of Amazon, and I'm pretty sure I have it listed in my Amazon store. I lightly sanded the stripes for the rustic look. And when you have a stencil, there's all those little gaps that are necessary. I wanted to fill those in so it looked more like it was hand painted. And when that was all dry, I finished giving it a light sanding. And here's how my rustic tray turned out. I really love this thing. I can't wait to put it on my coffee table. I kind of wish that center stencil was larger. I think a larger one might look a little better, but I'm okay with it for now. It may get another redo in the future. What do you think? The next thrift flip is of 2 items that I recently thrifted. I'm taking this spoon and this fork and I'm combining it with this frame. I cleaned the frame and then I gave it 2 coats of paint in my favorite white antique villa. This is one of those projects where the painting just needed to get done because I wanted to get to the fun stuff. I'm taking these two molds and amazing casting resin to make my silverware a little fancy. To use the casting resin, you just take equal parts of A and B, mix them together, and pour into your mold. It takes about 10 minutes for the resin to turn white, and once they turn completely white, they're ready to use. I sanded the areas on the spoon and the fork where I was going to glue the castings, and I used wood glue to glue the castings down. And I tried to clean up any extra glue. I thought I had done a good job cleaning off the extra glue, but when you're using a metallic spray paint, every little imperfection is magnified. So I had to sand off any area that had some glue, and then I decided to spray them gold instead of the silver. And I used black wax to age the spoons and bring out the detail of the castings. Now I need to finish my frame, and I'm using decoupage paper from the Curated Maker's Box, and this one's by Roy Cycled. And I'm using Wise Owl Clear Matte Sealer for my decoupage medium. I misted the decoupage paper to help get rid of the fold lines. I notched the corners of the decoupage paper. That made it much easier to get the paper down into the corners. And I used the plastic wrap to smooth down the paper and get out any wrinkles or bubbles. Next, I used a brand new razor blade to cut off the extra paper. Now, the border of my frame was looking pretty boring, so I added some more molds, and this time I used the Classic Elements mold. I wanted to add some age to the frame, and I thought the Waverly Antique Wax might not be dark enough because the silverware was pretty dark, so I mixed together black wax, antique wax, and some clear wax. I applied the wax with an artist brush because I wanted to make sure I was going to like it and that it wasn't going to be too dark. And once I knew I was going to like it, I switched to an old stencil brush to apply the wax. And these castings on the corner, I should have spray painted them before I glued them down, but I didn't. So I had to spray some spray paint into a little cup, and then I painted them that way. And that spray paint dries really fast, so you have to be quick. Once I had the corners painted, I finished them with the wax. And I can't believe I actually remembered to finish the back of the frame before I put on the spoon and the fork. All I had to do was do the craft paper around the back and then realign the hardware. And I have to thank Melissa from Spindle Mountain Mercantile. I did the back of the frame just like she does. Next, you're going to see me get out my JB Weld. I read the instructions. I turn my frame so it's going to be lined up when I turn on my camera. But my camera's already on, so when I think I'm turning on my camera, I'm really turning it off, and I miss that whole part. But here is how my fancy spoon and fork turned out. I don't know why I finished the back like I might sell it, because I really think I'm going to be keeping these. My next thrift flip is one of my favorite items, a basket. I have baskets everywhere, and this basket has been in my backyard. That's why it's a little bit faded. It's actually I think it's a Pottery Barn basket. So it's a really good quality, which is probably why it survived a Las Vegas summer, or many Las Vegas summers. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is dry brush this chalk paint in the color turmeric onto the basket. And this is also one of my favorite colors of paint. Next, I took this wooden plaque that I purchased from either Dollar Tree or Hobby Lobby. Here, you can't see me sanding it, but there's usually always one rough edge on these little wooden plaques. So I sanded it, made it smooth, I painted it white, and now I'm going to apply some decoupage paper. This decoupage paper is from the Painted Photographer, and it was one of the selections in Sonnet's curated Maker's Box. I used decoupage gel in matte by Redesign with Prima, and a piece of plastic wrap to smooth out the paper. Then I sealed it with the decoupage gel. I have a lot of paint, but I had no paint in my regular stash in brown. Brown is just not a color I ever buy. But because of these maker boxes, I went through all the little paint pods that I get with them, and I actually had two. And this is by DIY, and I'm pretty sure it is Prairie Gray. But if I have that wrong and you know what color it really is, would you leave that in the comments? Because I think this is a really pretty brown. I did 2 coats of the paint, and I sealed it with the decoupage gel that I was using. Because it was a chalk paint, it needed to be sealed. And then I added some Fusion antiquing glaze. You just apply the glaze and then you wipe it back with a damp cloth. I also used the Prairie Gray around the rim of the basket, and now I'm applying some of the glaze. I used Gorilla Glue to glue the plaque to the basket. And right here, that is a little piece of a painter stick that I applied to the back of the plaque so that when I glued it to the basket, it would be nice and straight. The last thing I did was add some rub and buff to the handle. And here's how my basket turned out. I know this isn't a color that everyone loves, but I love this color and I love baskets, so it's a win for me, but let me know what you think. For my next thrift flip, I'm taking this sign. I'm removing the bird because I really only want the bird. And then I'm going to add it to this sign. I don't really like covering up a Bible verse, but I would never use this sign like that. It's just not a pretty sign. I will be adding decoupage to the sign though, so the first thing I need to do is paint it white. It does not have to be a great job. It's just better to have a white background when you're working with decoupage paper. I did a second coat because I wanted to make sure that none of that lettering came through the decoupage paper. Next, I lined up the decoupage paper and the bird just to find out the best layout. And then I trimmed it down so that it would be easier to work with. I used Mod Podge for my decoupage medium. And I started at the top and I just worked my way down. This paper is a little bit thicker, so I could pick it up if I went real slow without tearing it. So I could just realign it so that I had a nice straight edge across the top. And I'm using a piece of plastic wrap to smooth down the paper. I removed the extra hardware that was not needed for this new picture. I sealed the paper with one more coat of Mod Podge. Once the paper was dry, I used a 100 grit emery board to file off the edges of the paper to give it a nice smooth look. Next, I took a razor blade and I went in between the pieces of wood because I still wanted the slats of wood to show. But I think the Mod Podge was still wet in between because the paper did tear. And if it was completely dry, I don't think it would have torn. So I probably should have waited overnight before I did this. I used Waverly Antique Wax to accent the lines, and it did cover up where the paper was torn. So I just kept going, but instead of just using the razor blade, I also used a screwdriver because that razor blade just was not working. When you're using a dark wax, it's always better to put down a layer of clear wax. Then you'll have better control with the dark wax. Just in case you get it too dark, you can always lift it back up. You can also use it as an eraser if you get it way too dark. And then I applied the antique wax all around the edges. I wanted to freshen up the paint on the bird, so I painted it in Dixie Belle patina paint in bronze. And for the third coat, I pounced on the paint to get rid of all the brush strokes. I'm using these little Dollar Tree blocks to attach the bird to the picture, and I painted those as well. And then I used the Waverly Antique Wax and I went around the edges of the bird. And the last thing I had to do was glue the bird to the picture. I glued the wood blocks to the picture. Then I set the bird on it to make sure everything was lined up okay. And then I put the glue on top of the wood blocks. And then I put the bird down. I think this decoupage paper is so pretty, but it is definitely a large print, probably designed for flipping furniture. So I didn't really know how to use it because I don't really flip furniture, but I thought this was the perfect application for it. You'll have to let me know what you think. Or how would you use this paper? I'd love to know. Most of the time when I thrift something, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do with it, but that was not the case with this box. So I've had this box a couple of years, waiting for inspiration, and then I thrifted this book wallpaper border, and I knew just what I wanted to do. This was such an easy flip, and I really like the way it turned out. It has been a little while since I have used wallpaper, but this was pre-pasted, so I just had to run it through the water. And the next step is called booking, no pun intended, but you just put the pre-pasted sides together and you just let it rest for a minute before you apply the wallpaper. Once I had the paper lined up, I used a damp sponge just to smooth out the paper. And then I used a brayer to make sure everything was nice and flat and adhered to the wooden box. I took a brand new razor blade to cut the wallpaper. I didn't have any problems on the side, but this top, I could not get a clean cut. So I went to the other side, and then I thought I'll deal with the top in a minute. And look how nicely it cuts. I even went and got another razor blade. I thought maybe I grabbed an old razor blade by mistake, but I just kept working on it. It wasn't pretty, but I got it done. And just like decoupage paper, I took my 100 grit nail file and I went along the edge of the paper just to make sure it was nice and smooth and to give it a finished edge. Then I used a furniture marker and I went around the edge of the paper, because a lot of times when you use a file, it'll make like a raw edge on the paper that is often white. So I was just trying to make that blend in. And here's how my should have been easy thrift flip turned out. This is the way I have it in my house with the plant in it, and I really like it this way. But I also did the other side with the books going the other direction so it could be used like a riser. You'll have to let me know when's the last time you used pre-pasted wallpaper. I'm so glad I wasn't doing a whole wall. When I thrifted this enamel teapot, it was in perfect condition and I thought I was going to use it like a teapot. But when I washed it, I realized why someone donated it. There is a spot on this teapot where water is trapped and it always makes a little rusty drip. So I decided to turn this teapot into some home decor. And it's a super simple flip. As you can see, I'm just adding a transfer. And making these little cuts on the carrier sheet, it makes it so much easier to apply the transfer to a curved surface. A curved surface and a spout. So it wasn't that easy. Well, it was that easy. You just had to make a few extra cuts and just take your time. And it did split a little bit, and I'll show you how I'm going to fix that in a minute. And you can see when I lift the carrier sheet, there's quite a few little bits of leaves that are still on the carrier sheet. I went back and fixed the ones I could, but then the other ones, I just filled them in with some paint. I also want to put a transfer on the back of the teapot. So here I'm just fussy cutting the flowers because I don't want the little pot that they're in. And this side was so much easier. It's way easier when you're not going over a spout. I wanted to seal the transfers, but I still wanted it shiny, so I used this gloss sealer. And here's how my little teapot turned out. I had a few favorites in today's video, but I'd love to know if you have a favorite. And thank you so much for watching, for leaving kind comments, and for giving me a thumbs up. You can't believe how much just giving a thumbs up to a video helps grow my channel. It's all about that algorithm. Thank you again, and we will see you next time.